Hey, what is up everybody? Welcome back to my channel. My name's Frassix and this video is gonna be a very special video because this year has been winding down, and not only has this year almost finished, but also this decade is almost done. And throughout this decade we have had so many good songs, but we have also had so many good and great albums. And I just wanted to put out my 2 cents on what I think the top 20 albums of the decade should be. And with this ranking, please don't be mad or anything like that if I don't put an album that you thought should have been in the top 20 but wasn't in the top 20 for me. Mostly because, like, when I was making this list, I definitely was just like, what songs and what albums have I listened to the past 10 years of my life that I feel like deserved a place in the top 20? And it was definitely a lot harder to do because there was just so many albums. And then again, there were like some albums where I didn't like some of the songs, but then I did like some of the songs on the album. So I was like, should I even include it if I only liked half the songs or anything like that? So it's just definitely a really difficult thing, especially to put this together. Originally I was going to do only the top 10, but as I made the list more and more, I realized that there were a lot more albums that I really wanted to acknowledge on this ranking of the decade, I guess. So yeah, so just please don't be mad, or if you do like or agree with it, you know, comment down below, give it a thumbs up. And I guess without further ado, here is my top 20 albums of the decade. Okay, you guys ready? Here we go. My number 20 album is Born This Way by Lady Gaga. Number 19 is Camila by Camila Cabello. Number 18 is Evolution by Sabrina Carpenter. Number 17 is When the Sun Goes Down by Selena Gomez and The Scene. Number 16 is Femme Fatale by Britney Spears. Number 15 is Lover by Taylor Swift. Number 14 is Prism by Katy Perry. Number 13 is Up All Night by One Direction. Number 12 is Take Me Home by One Direction. And number 11 is Thank You Next by Ariana Grande. And now we are in the top 10 territory. And when making this list, I definitely already knew what my top 10 were, but I just wanted to make sure that it was my top 10. So as I made this list, and I made this list about a month ago or 2 ago, I did it around the same time as I did my songs list, which if you guys haven't watched my top 50 songs of the decade, the link will be down below. I just definitely wanted to make sure that this ranking of the albums was justifiable and correct, and as I, you know, played around with more of the albums and listed more albums, I just realized that yeah, my top 10 were my top 10 of the decade. So without further ado, here are my top 10. So number 10 is Flicker by Niall Horan. I just love this album so much. It is definitely more like folky pop, which originally when I listened to the first few singles that were released back in 2017 before the album was released, I definitely loved his style. It was definitely different, you know, after separating from One Direction and everything like that. They each member went on a different, you know, path, and then Niall chose this more folky kind of like rooted kind of sound. And at first I was hesitant about it because I was like, is it gonna be good? But when he kept on releasing songs, and then when he released the album, I was just like, wow, it's definitely something that he hasn't done before, and I love it so much. And I definitely can't wait for the next album that he's going to be releasing, which is going to be released next year at the beginning of the decade. So it seemed only fitting that I included him within the top 20, and more specifically the top 10 of my favorite albums of this decade. So I just really applaud him for, you know, taking this album and making it his own and his own lyrics and his own personal kind of flair to it, and I'm just really proud of him, and hopefully I get to meet him one day, or at least see him live in concert one day. But yeah, I feel like this deserves to be within the top 10. Number 9 is Purpose by Justin Bieber. This album came out in 2015 and it definitely was a big influence in my life. It came out around the time where I was just beginning college. All the songs were bops. It's definitely one of, I feel like it's his best album, honestly, personally. Like it grew with him, you know, he matured with this album. And I feel like all the songs definitely showed, like it definitely showed a different style. It showed a little bit kind of like a Caribbean kind of like influence, you know, with the, you know, the drums and whatnot and the sounds and everything like that. But it definitely shows a more aesthetic album, and I feel like compared to his like My World and My World 2.0 and Journals and stuff like that, I feel like this is not super poppy, but it's definitely, it has maturity to it, and that's what I love. And I also love the aesthetic of this album, you know, like I don't even know what the aesthetic of this album was. It was like more like just like modern kind of symbolism and stuff like that in the music videos for these, you know, where he wasn't in a lot of it, or he was only in it for like what, the first one for What Do You Mean, and then the rest of them were just dancing videos. And I thought that was pretty interesting, you know, because at the time, you know, I was just like, why was he not in these videos? And I guess the music and the dancing just spoke for itself, and I was just like, okay, no, I respect that. And it definitely produced hits like What Do You Mean, and then Sorry, and then Love Yourself. If you were to ask me what my favorite song off the album was, it'd probably be Purpose, or I'll Show You, or Life Is Worth Living. Those songs definitely had a big influence on me when I first heard the album. But again, the entire album is so cohesively crafted and perfect that I'm glad for it to be number 9 on my list. Number 8 is My Everything by Ariana Grande. This was definitely not only a shift in my thoughts about Ariana, but also the world's thoughts about Ariana, especially the music industry's thoughts about Ariana. It's definitely coming from like her debut album, which was Yours Truly. It's definitely a different sound to My Everything, because My Everything was a more mainstream kind of album, which is not a bad thing at all. In all honesty, Yours Truly captured or like caught my attention, but My Everything made me a fan of Ariana, you know, especially with the singles lineup and how all her singles were so successful, you know, with Problem, and then Break Free, and then Love Me Harder, and then One Last Time, and then even Bang Bang. Like it definitely solidified her as a mainstream kind of girl, and all the songs on this album are definitely amazing, you know. It definitely shows a more mature side to her, and I love how she keeps on maturing as each album gets released. And I just definitely remember thinking when I heard this album that it was something special. And you know, with the Honeymoon Tour, to, you know, perform these songs, like it was my life to just follow everything about that tour and to follow the choreography and the songs, and me listening to the songs live definitely gave me a new kind of respect for the album songs, and it just complemented each other, and I just really like that about this album. And yeah, and I still don't know how she can sit on that stool. Like, come on, only she can do that. She's a goddess. So my number 7 album is Revival by Selena Gomez. This came out again in 2015. It was also around the time where I was starting college. This is an album that definitely showed a major growth in Selena. You know, granted, you know, she, you know, separated from Hollywood Records, and then she did, you know, well, she did Stars Dance, which was her first like kind of like solo album, and then she, you know, separated from Hollywood Records, and then she came up with this album, which was honestly one of the, it's an amazing album. It has bops, it has sad songs, it has happy songs, it has dancey songs. It has all the songs. My favorite song from this album is Me and the Rhythm. It's definitely a fun, carefree song, and just all the singles, and definitely this era was one of my favorite eras ever from an artist. I kept on following up with like each thing that she was doing, you know, all the performances and all the promotions and everything, and I was even gonna go to the revival tour, but then I had to go to basic training. So I could have seen her in LA for this tour, but I couldn't because I was getting disciplined with a shaved head in Texas. So that's something I'm forever gonna regret. But I'm not going to miss the next tour and the next album, which again are released next year. I feel like a lot of artists are releasing their albums next year, and I'm so excited for next year because it's the beginning of a new decade, and it's definitely gonna feel like there's a familiarity, but there's also a newness to this kind of music scape, I guess, because you get to look at artists that have had so many successful previous works, then compare them to the new ones, and it's just, oh, I can't wait for next year. But enough about next year, let's talk about this year, or this decade. And yeah, I just really love this album. It definitely came at a very important time in my life, and it was essentially my favorite album of 2015. So if that says anything about what happened to me in 2015, then you know. Okay, so my number 6 album is Reputation. It is a album that is filled with club bangers and also some of the most softer moments of her career. And it was definitely an interesting time because it was released in 2017, you know, there were singles Look What We Made Me Do, Ready For It, you know, Delicate, Endgame, all those kinds of things. And it definitely showed a more, I feel like this is the most like mainstream album Taylor has released, you know, with like all the electronic sounds and like all like the bass and like just the pounding and the drums and just the loudness and darkness of it all. But that's also what it was supposed to be symbolic of, you know, just her reputation and how people were just perceiving her and how she essentially hid away from the world, even though she did release the album because she wanted the music to speak for herself. And then when she went on tour, you know, how she said that, you know, performing the songs live gave a whole new meaning to those songs because, you know, those songs are dark, like I said, but to see people react to the songs in the way that she saw them through people's faces in the audience, in the crowd, it definitely showed a different shift in what she was thinking with this album. And I feel like this is definitely one shifting point or a changing point, a turning point for Taylor to, you know, also this being the last album being released by Big Machine Records. So it's definitely interesting to see now that she has her own work and Lover and everything like that. You know, definitely an album which I can say that I love so much. All the songs are amazing. The tour definitely emphasized that, all the performances, all her confidence in this era. I love the aesthetic of this era, like the newspaper kind of things. I have both of the Target editions from when she released the album. I remember going to Target that day and my car was getting repaired, so I literally just sat at Starbucks and just went through the entire album, and the album was so aesthetic, it was so pleasing, and the songs were amazing. I wish I could have recorded my reactions, but I didn't even know reactions were a thing back then. So, or I didn't know I could do them at least, so. And now we are in top 5 territory. So now my number 5 album of the decade is Sweetener by Ariana Grande. I'll be the first to say, when this album first came out, I hated it with a passion. You know, like No Tears Left to Cry and God Is Woman were iconic in their own ways, but I feel like overall as an album it was so different than I feel like anyone was expecting. It was more experimental, it was definitely with different collaborators, and it was just definitely a whole different shift from her first 3 albums. and I feel like a lot of people were hesitant about that, and especially me, because I didn't know what I was getting myself into. I knew it was different, but I didn't know how different it was going to be. So at first I literally did not like it at all, but me being an Ari fan, I listened to it, and the more that I listened to it, the more something changed in me. I feel like this was a learning point for me, because now I just love the song. As you can tell, it's my top 5 out of all the entirety of the albums that were released this decade. It is within my top 5. It's crazy just to think that now it's regarded as one of my favorites from her, because it was so different, it was so experimental, because it was in a different direction than what she was used to going to. And I mean, like, it won a Grammy. Like, it's justifiable that this is one of her best albums. Looking back at it, like, the aesthetic, like, I feel like I took it for granted the entire album era before Thank You Next, you know, became the thing. Like, I just really loved this era, and how different it was, how visual it was, how artsy it was. And I respect that about her, how she would do that, and how she definitely brought it to life. One of my favorite songs from here are Good Night and Go, which I know is kind of a cover. It's just a pure soft song, and I just love it. Of course, my favorite song from here is God Is a Woman. But yeah, I guess all the hard work and all the experimentation paid off, because, you know, it's regarded as one of my favorites. So congrats to Ariana for that. Number 4 is 1989 by Taylor Swift. I personally feel like aesthetically this was the most appealing, I guess, just because it's so like throwbackish and like Polaroids and like this kind of hipster era, which I love so much. This album was definitely something. I feel like this was the album that really made me like take her seriously as an artist, because before this, of course, there was, you know, her debut one, and then, you know, Fearless, and then Speak Now, and then Red and stuff like that. But I feel like I really didn't pay her enough attention until this era, which I feel like a lot of people didn't, because, you know, it was a defining moment, not just in her career, not just in my thoughts about her, but just in the music industry as a whole, because she transitioned from country to pop and made it publicly known that she was going from country to pop, because there was this shift and people couldn't really like box her in anymore. You know, she had to grow, she had to change, and it was only inevitable that she was gonna go into pop. And I couldn't be more proud to say that this album was the perfect representation of her going into pop. It's definitely, again, more synth pop. It's definitely chiller. I just love it. All the singles are bops, you know, Blank Space, you know, Shake It Off, Wildest Dreams, Style, Out of the Woods. Some of the best songs ever. They are so amazing. They are, it goes so well together, and I get that she loves like aesthetic cohesiveness of the songs, and I respect her for that. And what came out was an amazing album. This came out essentially 5 years ago, and the songs are still as iconic and as memorable as I remember them being, and I could not be more proud of her for releasing this album. I love it so much. And with that being said, my number 3 album is Red by Taylor again. And to be honest, this was not my favorite album from her. To be honest, 1989 was my favorite album, but I don't know, something changed this year where I was just like, you know what, I can respect this as an album. And at the end of the day, I feel like this is her best album, just because how, like, at the time when it was released in 2012, I didn't respect it as I should have. I'll admit that. All the songs, besides the singles, all the songs I didn't really respect. I mean, I still bought it on like the debut week to help with that, you know, over 1 million copies sold kind of thing. So you're welcome. But this album, I did not give it the appropriate amount of attention that it deserved. But for some reason, when I listened to it this year, there's just something in me, like when I finished listening to the entirety of the album, I just sat back and I was just like, I was missing out on so much. This album it's lyrically her best album. It's lyrically one of the best lyrical albums ever. It's so beautifully crafted, and it's so soft when it needs to be soft, and it's so big and loud when it needs to be loud. And I guess that's just something that I really like about this era. It's like so aesthetic and like hipsterish, and I love that kind of style so much. And for her to release an album that was so different, you can definitely tell this was different from her first 3 albums. And even though this was considered like the country Taylor, you could tell that this was not at all a country album. It was more of a country electro pop album, which a lot of people were confused about, and in all honesty, I was confused about it too when it first released. But looking back at it, I feel like it was a necessity that she had to do to fully transition into 1989, and all the hate that she endured and all the bad press and everything like that. She is a trooper, honestly. I feel like that's also why Red is one of my favorite, or that's why Red is my favorite album from her. It's because, and it not winning a Grammy, for her to be writing 1989, like, there's just something special about this era, and I feel like she can say the same thing if she were to ever watch this, that this was a pivotal moment in her career. And I guess we all have to thank this era for the Taylor that we have now. So that's why it's my favorite Taylor Swift album and my number 3 of the decade. Okay, so my number 2 album is Dangerous Woman. It came at a very pivotal time in my life. Like, literally, I shipped out for basic training in 2016 on a Tuesday, and then this album was supposed to release on that Friday. But of course, since I didn't have access to like a phone or any outside world technology, I didn't get to listen to this until like 2 months later, when I was leaving from basic training to tech school, and it became my favorite album from her. Like, all the songs, it's definitely more like electronic than her than Yours Truly was, or My Everything was. It was definitely a lot more darker, which I get, you know, I love it so much. Originally it was going to be Moonlight with, you know, Focus as the lead single, which Focus is still a bop, and Moonlight is still on this album, and it's so sweet and so pure. But I'm glad that she took a step back and she reevaluated what she wanted to put out into the world, and she came up with Dangerous Woman, the song, and then Dangerous Woman, the album. I feel like it's one of her more iconic looks, hence The Bunny. This album helped me through a lot. Like I said, I listened to this right after basic training into tech school, and it helped me throughout the entirety of tech school, especially like the first few months. And it defined my life so much that I even got a tattoo of it, you know, to symbolize how much this era meant to me, and how I'm so thankful for this era and all the songs that it gave me. And then, you know, Dangerous Woman tour and everything that she endured on there with the bombing and everything and the terrorist activity. It definitely helped me become a stronger person. I don't know how to explain it, but it just helped me become so much more confident. It definitely, during her 2016 style, it definitely influenced me. This entire era just influenced me, and I definitely built up upon this era, and it made me who I am today. So I'm very thankful for this era, and just very thankful for her and this album, and all the songs are amazing. But yeah. Okay, and now my number 1 album of the decade. When I was trying to put this list together, I kind of knew that this album was already going to be number 1, just because I've gone through so much with it, but I was also hesitant because I was like, this album is so old that is it even justifiable to be put at the #1 spot? And as I made this list, and as I, put, 1989 in red and then Dangerous Woman, I was just like, does it compare to these? Is it really deserving of being topping all these amazing albums? And then when I listened to the album again, and then it pulled back all those memories, and I was just like, for me, yes, it's definitely justifiable for me putting this album as #1. And what is this album, you may be asking? Well, my #1 album of the decade is Teenage Dream by Katy Perry. And I know a lot of you may be like what? Like, this is totally like something that I didn't expect, or then again, maybe it's something that you guys totally did expect. But let me just explain a little bit. I'm not gonna give you a whole backstory or anything, but I guess I can just explain kind of why this is my #1. So this came out in 2010, and it's not just the album that was influential, but it was the entire era of Teenage Dream. It was, like I said, it was released in 2010, so it was definitely the literal beginning of the decade. And I can confidently say that if it wasn't for this album, I would not be the same person I am today. I can say that with 100% certainty. Like, maybe I might listen to different albums and stuff like that maybe might shape me to become similar to who I am, but it was because of this album that I started to listen to, step away from like Disney kind of songs, like Disney Channel kind of songs, and then really step into the mainstream kind of music world. It definitely made me learn about like the charting of songs and the Billboard Hot 100 and the top 200 for albums and everything like that. It made me really grow as a music listener, and it definitely helped me shape my thoughts about music and how everything should be like influential and visual and themes, and just this was a very thematic album for me. The candy era, the sweetness, the story of how, she released these songs, and they were about love and pureness and pure bubblegum pop, and then at the end of this era, she got divorced, and like how she overcame that. It's more like deeper than a lot of people think it is, especially me being a fan from the beginning. I can definitely like walk through the story of this era and this album, and it's so amazing. Like, all the songs on this album are pure pop perfection. I can't stress that enough. All the singles, as you can tell by her 5 #1s, tying Michael Jackson for the most #1s from an album. It's that iconic, California Girls, Teenage Dream, Firework, E.T., and then Last Friday Night, and then The One That Got Away, and then Part of Me, and then Wide Awake. It's iconic. It's definitely an iconic album, and I feel like it's one of those albums like where you're like, oh, that song came from there, because those songs are so embedded in our mainstream media that you're just like, oh, I didn't know that came from this album. And it's definitely a special album when you look at it, and it's definitely a special album for me because, again, like I kind of explained it already, like I was going through a move, and this was before like Spotify and Pandora was a thing, or Apple Music. So I was really like, whatever music I had on my iPod was the music that I listened to. And me, after I moved to California, I downloaded this album, and I guess the rest is history. I could only really listen to this album, and I guess the success it was having outside also influenced me to listen to this album even more. Even though I already love this album, I feel like the success of it, like I could be proud. This is the first time I was proud of an entire album, an entire era, an entire person. Like, it was definitely something that I never really experienced before. And you know, me just being like 13 at the time when this released, it was mind-blowing to, you know, like me being a literal, like the beginning of being a teenager, having Teenage Dream as essentially the foundation for all the music that would, you know, later come out of the music industry, and how everything would pile up on top of each other, but at the base of it was Teenage Dream. It's definitely mind-blowing just to think that this album is almost 10 years old, and it'll forever be one of my favorites. It's definitely something that I feel like, I'll admit, I don't listen to as much now, but when I do listen to it, it's like basically like a friend that you don't talk to for a long time, but then when you do talk to them, it's basically like you never miss a day of talking, because it's just so natural and casual. That's the same thing for this album. Every time I listen to these songs, they're just classics, and I could not be more proud to say that this is my #1 album of the decade. Simple as that. But yeah, those are my top 20 albums of the decade. Hopefully you guys agree with some of the albums that are on this list. If you guys don't agree, or if you guys want to add an album or take away an album or anything like that, just feel free to leave a comment down below. I would love to know what you guys think were your 20 albums of the decade. Don't be mad. Please respect my decisions for having the albums here. Hopefully, maybe it influenced you to, you know, listen to an album that you didn't hear before, or an album that you haven't heard in a while, or anything like that. So yeah, so if you guys do like my rankings, or just like this video, or like the effort that I put into this video, give it a thumbs up. And if you guys haven't already, subscribe. I'm gonna be putting out a few more end of the decade kind of listings or rankings or whatever, and hopefully you guys can, you know, just start a conversation, you know, with me. I love to talk to people. I love to respond to nice comments, and just really just get to know you guys, and you guys get to know me. And I feel like with me sharing what my top whatevers were for the decade, I feel like you guys can really just sort of have like a gist of what I am and who I am. So nothing else much more to say than, you know, just thank you guys so much for watching. If you guys made it this far, hopefully you guys made it this far. If you guys haven't, it's okay. But thank you guys so much for watching, and until the next video, the wonder won't stop. Talk to you guys later. Bye.